I've decided to begin a new life without you." The words sliced through the warm air of the elegant bistro where we had gathered to celebrate my daughter's college graduation. My husband of 28 years, Richard Hale, stood at the head of the long table, champagne flute still raised, delivering his personal revelation in place of the toast he had promised to make for our daughter's achievement. Utensils stilled. Conversations halted. Over 50 faces turned toward me waiting for a gasp, a breakdown, some dramatic reaction to feed their morbid curiosity. But instead, I smiled. "Thank you for your honesty," I said, my voice calm. "My name is Marilyn Hale. I'm 54 years old, and until that moment, I had played the role of the perfect wife and mother with unyielding precision. I had pressed pause on my own ambitions to support Richard through 3 failed ventures, a midlife crisis, and 2 decades of chasing purpose. I had raised our daughter, Claire, who now sat beside me, speechless, still in her graduation robe, her smile frozen into something unreadable. Across the room, I caught sight of Vanessa Rhodes, Richard's 36-year-old girlfriend, looking uncomfortable at the back table, surrounded by people I had once called friends. Friends who clearly knew more than they ever said. Vanessa had been to our Thanksgiving dinners, had borrowed my books, had once asked me for career advice. With deliberate grace, I reached into my handbag and retrieved a cream-colored envelope, placing it quietly beside Richard's plate. He blinked at it. "What is this?" "Something for you to read later," I replied, rising from my seat. I turned to Claire, kissed her on the temple, and whispered, "This is still your moment, sweetheart. I am so incredibly proud of you." Then I turned to the crowd, many of whom were still too stunned to chew their filet mignon. "Please," I said with a pleasant smile, "enjoy your afternoon. The food is lovely." And with that, I walked out, heels clicking against polished floors, 50 stunned faces tracking my exit. I stepped through the restaurant doors and into the August heat. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The door behind me swung open with a forceful clang. "Marilyn!" Richard's voice cracked behind me, no longer confident, now shrill and confused. "What the hell is this? What did you do?" I didn't turn around. The envelope contained divorce papers along with the first volley in a campaign I had been preparing for months. You see, I had always been the practical one. While Richard followed whims and burned through savings, I had kept our home afloat. I worked extra shifts as a finance officer while he played furniture artisan for 6 months, then tired of it. I quietly funded Claire's entire education while Richard poured money into dubious startups. My dreams, like launching a women's finance consultancy, were always delayed for a better time. 3 months earlier, I noticed something odd: transfers from our joint accounts to an unfamiliar name. Small amounts at first, then bolder ones. I didn't confront him right away. I watched. I documented. I traced the funds. I pulled account statements, hired a private investigator, and did what I do best: follow the money. The picture that emerged was worse than I had dared imagine. Not only had Richard been stashing away money for over a year, he had used those funds to wine and dine Vanessa, jewelry, resorts, a beachfront property tour in Charleston, all while warning me to cut costs to prepare for retirement. He had also foolishly left his phone unattended. The texts were all there. Plans for a clean break after Claire's graduation. "She won't make a scene in public," one read. "Let's announce it during the party. Then I'll be free." What Richard had forgotten or never truly understood was that I was a financial professional. I had 25 years of experience tracing. Stepped inside, and everything was as it always had been: the mahogany console from my parents, the travel photos on the wall, the faint smell of peonies. Except now, I saw it all through different eyes. No longer shared. No longer his. Upstairs in our bedroom, I opened the closet. His bags were already packed, tucked behind mine. So predictable. So careful with appearances. Yet so careless with everything else that mattered. My phone buzzed. Texts from friends, from Claire, from Richard's sister Delilah, who had flown in for graduation. I answered only Claire. "I'm okay. You enjoy today. We'll talk tonight. I love you, always." I hadn't wanted to ruin her moment, but the truth had its own timing. A few hours later, I heard Richard's car. The door slammed. "Marilyn." I remained in the living room, laptop open, reviewing final drafts of legal files. Calmly, I closed it. He stormed in, cheeks flushed, eyes wild. In his hand the envelope. What is corporate fraud? I knew how to make records airtight. And more importantly, I remembered the prenuptial agreement he once insisted on when I had more wealth than he did. That prenup included a fidelity clause. And unlike his moral compass, that clause had no expiration. While Richard and Vanessa planned their new life, I built a legal case. I retained an attorney. I gathered every statement, every text, every transfer. I even pulled receipts for the diamond earrings he gifted her, a set he claimed had been purchased for Claire's graduation. I had filed for divorce the morning of the ceremony. The papers were officially filed, stamped, and waiting for his signature. He just didn't know it yet. I didn't return to the celebration. Instead, I drove home our historic brick house nestled in Savannah's old district. According to his texts, this was the home he planned to hand over to Vanessa once the dust settled. I smiled at the thought. I parked. This? He demanded. The legal confirmation of what you've already chosen, I said coolly. You filed for divorce on our daughter's graduation day? I thought it fit with your schedule, I replied. You were planning your big exit. I just beat you to the punch, he scoffed. You can't do this. The prenup expired years ago. I smiled. No, Richard, it didn't. Section 14. The fidelity clause remains binding for the full duration of the marriage. Your lawyer should have told you that. His face went pale. You talked to a lawyer? Several. I also have records of every transaction, every gift, every rendezvous, all admissible. And by the way, Vanessa's not going to like what's coming either. He staggered slightly. You've always been cold, Marilyn. No, I said, rising. I've always been composed. There's a difference. As I picked up my overnight bag, he called after me. What about Claire? Have you even thought about what this does to her? I paused in the doorway, for the first time letting the anger slip through. Don't you dare invoke our daughter to defend your betrayal. She deserved better. We both did. He fell silent. As I stepped outside, I heard him groan. Vanessa had already moved into their new apartment, an apartment with a lease I had already seen and blocked. The leasing agent had called our landline for verification. I made sure the application was denied. Richard Hale's fantasy life was beginning to unravel, and I hadn't even started yet. Delilah's bungalow was everything I remembered: warm, filled with books and windows framed by climbing ivy. She pulled me into a tight hug the moment I walked through the door. I just heard from Claire, she said, guiding me into the kitchen, where a bottle of red had already been uncorked. Are you okay? I'm lighter than I expected to be, I replied honestly, accepting the glass. I never thought Richard would pull something like that. A public announcement? In front of all those people? He's lost his mind. No, I said. He's just lost control. We moved into the sunroom, surrounded by her succulents and old poetry books. I always admired how Delilah had chosen a life of independence, never married, never swayed by convention. I had envied that in quiet moments, even if I never admitted it out loud. What was in the envelope? She asked, eyes glittering. Divorce papers, I said. The filing, the financial documentation, and the prenup complete with evidence of his infidelity. Delilah choked on her wine. The prenup? Oh my God. I remember when he demanded that. Daddy had just given him seed money for that first doomed startup. He was so nervous you'd walk off with his legacy. The irony, I said, raising my glass. Before she could respond, my phone rang. Claire. I braced myself and picked up. Honey, I'm coming to Aunt Delilah's, she said immediately. Her voice was taut. Claire, sweetheart, you don't have to, I'm already on my way. She arrived 15 minutes later, still in her graduation dress, mascara streaked and shoulders trembling. She flew into my arms like she used to when she had bad dreams as a child. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered, pressing her face against my shoulder. Because I didn't want you carrying this burden during your final semester, I murmured. You've worked too hard. I wasn't going to let his mistake ruin your day. She pulled back, eyes red. Well, he took care of that anyway. We sat in Delilah's cozy living room while I gently walked Claire through the full story. The months of financial deception, the affair, the texts, the prenup clause, the papers I'd prepared. I knew something was off with Dad, Claire said quietly. He was always checking his phone, distant, but I never thought. We never want to believe people we love are capable of betrayal, Delilah said gently. A message buzzed on my phone. Philip, my attorney. Court approved the emergency motion. Joint assets frozen. Discovery process begins immediately. Gregory would now have only limited access to his personal funds. The rest, the accounts, the investments, the vacation property in escrow, were off limits. I showed Claire the message. Good, she said with rare steel in her voice. He deserves it. I touched her hand. You're allowed to be angry, but remember, he's still your father. Your relationship with him is separate from what's happening between us. Claire shook her head. Maybe one day, but not now, not after this. The doorbell rang. Delilah answered. Her face was unreadable when she returned. It's Richard, she said, and he brought company. Vanessa. I rose, calm again, like slipping into old armor. Vanessa looked like she wished she were anywhere else. She hovered behind Richard, clutching her purse like a shield. Richard, however, was furious. Marilyn, you need to stop this madness. Unfreeze the accounts. Be reasonable. Claire stood up beside me. Maybe you should have tried being reasonable before ruining my graduation. His face softened. Claire, honey, don't, she snapped. This involves me. You blew up our family in front of all our friends. You lied to Mom for months. You lied to me. Vanessa placed a hand on Richard's arm. Maybe we should go. No, he barked, shrugging her off. Not until this is resolved. Delilah stepped forward. My sister-in-law is the only rational one here. You're the one who detonated your marriage over risotto. I stayed seated, watching the cracks form in Richard's mask. Vanessa's eyes flicked between us, anxious. The accounts will remain frozen until the court decides, I said coolly. 3 days from now, then the judge will determine what's fair. 3 days? Richard spat. What am I supposed to do until then? You have your personal account, the one you've been draining into for over a year. Vanessa's head turned sharply. Wait, you have a separate account? Richard ignored her. This is vindictive, Marilyn. No, I replied. It's precise. Claire crossed her arms. Did you really think you could just walk out, start a new life, and no one would notice? That we wouldn't fight back? Vanessa looked suddenly pale. I didn't know he was going to make a scene. He told me he'd talk to you privately. Richard stared at her in betrayal. Their alliance was already fracturing. I think you both should leave, Delilah said firmly. Richard turned to Claire. You know relationships change. People drift. Her voice was ice. People don't drain retirement accounts and lie for a year because they drifted. You humiliated us. They left in silence, and we sat in it for a long moment. Claire eventually leaned into me. I've never talked to Dad like that. I held her tightly. You were brave. Delilah handed us fresh glasses of wine. To new beginnings. I clinked glasses with her, thinking, this was never about revenge. This was about reclaiming what was mine, and I was only getting started. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a gray Tuesday morning, the kind where even the courthouse steps feel somber. I arrived dressed in a sharp slate gray pantsuit, my attorney Philip by my side. Richard looked less assured than usual. His lawyer, a young, clearly unprepared corporate associate, fumbled through his notes. He hadn't expected the prenup to still be valid. He hadn't expected I would come with meticulous records. He hadn't expected me to come at all. The judge, a silver-haired woman with a voice like steel, reviewed the documents with unwavering focus. Section 18, she read aloud, flipping through the prenup. It clearly states this agreement remains in force for the duration of the marriage and any legal proceedings relating to its dissolution. Richard leaned toward his attorney, whispering frantically. The lawyer flushed. The judge looked up. Do you contest the fidelity clause, Mr. Hale? We believe the time elapsed invalidates, his attorney began, but she cut him off. There is no expiration here. The language is explicit. The clause stands. Richard went pale. And the financial transfers? She asked, now turning to Philip. We've provided documentation of over $78,000 transferred to an undisclosed account over the course of 14 months, Philip said. Evidence of gifts, luxury purchases, and joint assets spent on an extramarital relationship. The judge's brow furrowed. A clear violation of the agreement's financial transparency clause. She shuffled the papers, then looked at Richard. All joint assets will remain frozen pending full discovery. The Hale home will remain in Mrs. Hale's possession under the terms of the fidelity clause. Mr. Hale may continue using his personal account for necessary living expenses. Richard's face flushed with fury. This is outrageous. Read what you sign next time, the judge said dryly. Court will reconvene in 30 days. As I walked out of the courtroom, Richard caught up to me. Marilyn, please. Let's be reasonable. We spent almost 3 decades together. Doesn't that count for something? It counted for everything, I said, pausing just long enough to meet his eyes. Until the day you decided it didn't. And then I left him standing there in the hallway alone with his regrets and an overpriced lawyer who couldn't save him. The fallout came fast. Within 2 weeks, the truth had spread through our community. Friends called, some in support, some in whispered curiosity. I remained graceful but quiet, only confirming we were separating and that it was mutual. The details were already speaking for themselves. And Richard? His facade crumbled faster than I could have anticipated. The beachfront property he promised Vanessa? Gone. The lease they attempted to secure? Rejected. The car he'd made a deposit on? Refunded. The accounts he had siphoned funds into were frozen, and the creditors started calling. Then Delilah phoned me, chuckling. You'll never guess. Vanessa left. She moved out? Yesterday. Told her friend she didn't sign up to date a man with financial instability. Turns out Richard isn't as attractive without other people's money. I allowed myself a laugh, sharp and brief. He'd always been an illusionist. But illusions only hold if no one looks too closely. And while he unraveled, I rebuilt. The savings I had quietly maintained, the same ones I used to cover Claire's college bills when Richard was tight on cash, were more than enough to give me breathing room. I rented a small office downtown and launched Hale Financial Transitions, the consultancy I'd dreamed of for years. My first 2 clients? Women going through divorce. Then came more. A widow uncertain about her pension. A single mother navigating homeownership. I guided them through what I wished someone had done for me earlier. I didn't just crunch numbers, I gave them control. 6 months later, I'd expanded to a larger office and hired 2 associates. Claire, now working for a marketing agency in Charleston, called me regularly. You're helping people when they feel the most powerless, she told me during one call. You turned all of this into something good. I'm just giving them the tools, I replied. The power was always theirs. The final hearing took place on what would have been our 29th wedding anniversary. Poetic, in a way. Richard looked worn. His business, already shaky, was failing without my quiet behind-the-scenes guidance. His support network had dried up. His phone buzzed throughout the morning, but he didn't check it. I knew why. The judge upheld every word of the prenup. I kept the house, 70% of our joint investments, my full retirement accounts, and the consultancy I had legally protected as a sole proprietorship. Richard walked away with his personal savings, what was left after legal fees, and his name. That was all. As I exited the courthouse, he stopped me one last time. I made a mistake, he said, quieter than I'd ever heard him. Is there any chance we could try again? I met his eyes, not with anger, but with something colder. Clarity. No, I said. That door is closed. And for the first time, he didn't argue. You deserve happiness, Marilyn, he said, voice tight. I hope you find it. I already did, I replied. The moment I stopped waiting for permission to live my own life. 6 months later, the new office was bright and modern, with local art on the walls and fresh coffee always brewing. My name on the glass door meant something now, something earned. Clients continued to grow. The waiting list for consultations stretched months out. I gave lectures at women's centers. I mentored young women in finance. And every so often, I'd receive an anonymous thank you card. Women helping women. That's what this had become. Claire, visited often. One day, she sat across from my desk and said, "You know the irony, right? What if Dad had just been honest? If he'd walked away without lies or theft, he might have kept half of everything." I smiled. People rarely ruin their lives in one move. They do it in 100 small betrayals. She nodded, then leaned across the desk. "I'm proud of you, Mom." That meant more than anything. The envelope I'd slid across that white linen tablecloth had once been just an escape plan, but in truth, it became the blueprint for my rebirth. The moment I stopped asking for respect and simply demanded it on paper, in court, and in life, I didn't just survive betrayal. I turned it into a business. I turned it into a voice. I turned it into a legacy. Because sometimes, the best kind of revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming exactly who they said you never would be.